Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. With the governor's race and 3 statewide initiatives, plus Seattle's choices on a $1 billion levy, citywide council member, and a new police chief, it's a busy summer ahead.
I'm running for governor.
For the state's top job, Democrat Bob Ferguson could face Republican Dave Reichert, a candidate whose own party did not endorse him. And that's just one of many complex storylines on your ballot this fall.
This thing has destroyed the private market.
Let's Go Washington is pushing a slate of statewide initiatives that could repeal the Climate Commitment Act, end the capital gains tax, and let people opt out of the state's long-term care plan.
It will bankrupt the program.
Thank you.
And Seattle has some big decisions ahead, with Police Chief Adrian Diaz no longer in charge. Plus, there's a race for citywide council position 8, and a $1.5 billion transportation levy, the largest in city history.
Officers responded to a shooting.
Seattle schools are under scrutiny too, after the shooting death of a 17-year-old student, and a plan to close about 20 elementary schools.
We don't have the resources to continue on the same path we're going down right now.
What issues are top of mind for some of Seattle's top journalists?
There's been a lot of, I think, dissent within the ranks.
I think Tanya Wu is in that moderate space.
Our panel weighs in.
The most recent iterations of the legislature have really been kind of playing chicken with the initiative process.
A reporter roundtable on the summer's biggest stories, next on City Inside Out. Welcome once again to City Inside Out. I'm Brian Callanan, and I have with me some journalists to talk about a number of different headlines going on this summer, including Mike Carter, staff reporter for the Seattle Times. Mike, great to have you here.
Thank you.
And
nice to be here.
Great to have you. Also, we have with us Ruth Bayang. She is the editor of the Northwest Asian Weekly. Ruth, good to see you again.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We also have with us Paul Queary, editor and publisher of the Washington State Observer. Paul, good to see you, too.
Nice to be with you.
All right, here we go. Ruth, maybe I can start with you. I wanted to talk about some of the big news at your publication. Northwest Asian Weekly has new ownership. Founder Asunta Ng has handed over control after 41 years of leadership. And 2 things strike me about this. 1, we have a local paper surviving and thriving. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that too commonly these days. And 2, it's a local ownership group taking over. I just wanted to talk about this. Are we going to see a lot of changes at the paper going forward, or what does the future hold for Northwest Asian Weekly?
I think definitely the Northwest Asian Weekly is going to continue to amplify the local voices that have been underrepresented in the past, and just really staying the course of our mission. I don't see a lot of changes coming. Perhaps in the next 6 to 12 months, we might see more of a shift towards digital platforms. But for now, it is the status quo, and we will keep delivering the news.
All right, keep on keeping on. Thank you very much for that, Ruth. Mike, maybe I can talk to you about another big change I wanted to ask you about, and that is Seattle's looking for a new police chief. So Bruce Harrell removed Adrian Diaz from his post. Diaz now working on special assignments for the SPD. Diaz has been surrounded by allegations that he was unwelcoming and in some cases discriminatory towards women and people of color. This as the SPD continues to struggle hiring officers. So this investigation into what Diaz did is nowhere near complete, but was this a decision that Mayor Harrell had to make in this moment? How do you look at this?
I think he had to. I think that the appearance, the SPDs have appeared to be stagnant. They've been struggling. There have been controversies that have been huge distractions for Diaz, and he's had a hard time getting his feet underneath him. There's been a lot of, I think, dissent within the ranks. Certainly, these allegations involving an assistant chief and threats and tort claims and lawsuits have become a distraction. And you know, the city needs a police chief, and it's clear that. With the consent decree, that Judge Robart isn't going to remove those conditions until they have a permanent, steady chief, and that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Well, he's not good enough to be chief. Why keep him at the SPD? Have you asked yourself that question?
I have. I don't think Well, you know, the thing about chiefs is they serve at the mayor's discretion, and all of the chiefs at the police department are actually hold the rank of captain.
Right.
And,
okay.
I assume he could be fired without cause as chief, but I don't think that there's any other reason to terminate him pending the outcome of these investigations,
Okay.
and give him the benefit of the doubt. They just need leadership,
Yeah.
and that's something that they've been lacking at this point.
Thank you. And Paul, maybe I can jump to you because we have an interim chief in Sue Rahr, the former King County Sheriff and former head of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, our state's police academy. She's not a candidate for the permanent SPD chief job, but Seattle Police, like so many other police departments around the country, are having a lot of challenges bringing in new officers. Is Sue Rahr going to be able to right the ship for the SPD when it comes to police hiring? What do you think?
I think that's a really thorny question. I mean, there's the council shifted a little bit, but there's just generally been kind of a political hostility in the city toward the police, and you've seen a lot of officers moving to other jurisdictions, and I think that it's a tough hire, to get people to come in, and the department has always struggled to hire people who wanted to actually live in the city. Most of the SPD officers live outside the city, and so I think
less of a tough hire with a 23% raise this year.
Yeah, they're the highest paid officers in the state now. Yeah.
Oh, and from surrounding states as well. And there's it's a pretty big carrot. There are a lot of people who still want to be police officers, and I think they just have to find the combination to bring them here. Yep. They're not going to do it if the department appears to be in crisis and turmoil all the time.
Yeah, Paul, I was just seeing Sue Rahr as kind of that calming interim chief, I guess, that the Seattle Police need. I don't know how I know you've talked with her in the past. I was just trying to think about what role she's going to serve there.
I think I just think that it's a tough thing to come into for exactly what Mike's talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, the department's been in turmoil for really a long time, and not showing a lot of sign of emerging from it anytime soon. And if I'm an officer looking for work, I might look someplace else with a more stable climate.
Fair. Ruth, I wanted to make sure I asked you this question because a lot of the rumblings I'm hearing around City Hall are saying the SPD should look outside of its own ranks, get someone outside the city of Seattle to be the next chief. Do you think that's the kind of person needed at this point for the SPD? Some thoughts on that?
It might be. I recall that when we hired Gil Kurlikowski, we hired him from outside the city.
Yeah. Kathleen O'Toole, another example.
Exactly. Yeah. So it would be a good thing to have someone with a fresh perspective come in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mike, what do you think? Inside, outside?
I think that we've seen a kind of a pattern with internal chiefs, starting with Jim Pugel, and then Carmen was
Carmen Best
for a while, and then Adrian Diaz was the interim for quite a while. You're not going to change the dynamic of the department, I don't think, if you've got the same people running it, just rotating them through and through. Now, there are some awfully talented people in that department, but there are some awfully talented people outside too. I mean, Kathleen O'Toole came in at the worst when the department was at its nadir, and made tremendous changes.
Yeah. And she's helping with the hiring process now.
She's helping with this hiring process.
Yeah, interested to see where that goes. Ruth, let me jump back to you for another policing question, if I could. So Mayor Harrell is rolling out a new crime prevention technology program, pilot program here. It's not going to include this controversial ShotSpotter surveillance technology that the mayor's been talking about for many years, but the plan does include closed-circuit TV, some new software that helps with information sharing, and some more automated license plate readers. Now, cameras are set to go up, as I understand it, in 3 areas: Aurora Avenue North, the 3rd Avenue corridor downtown, and Chinatown ID. I just wanted to ask, do you support this move by the mayor, and what impact is this tech going to have potentially in the CID neighborhood?
Well, for the CID, I know that in the past we have covered stories, and there has been an appetite for closed-circuit TV, especially from business owners. It's commonplace to hear from business owners of my window was smashed again. This is a daily occurrence. So I think to have that CCTV, there is support for it in Chinatown, but there are also dissenters, as with anything. So
privacy concerns, et cetera?
Yes, privacy concerns mostly. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, I didn't know if have you been tracking this, Mike, with these cameras, et cetera?
I'm aware of it. I'm concerned that people are concerned that the government will be, I mean, it just seems like more government surveillance potentially. You know, Seattle has a surveillance ordinance that limits this sort of behavior by the government, and that's going to be, I think, sort of a sticky wicket for the city. The other thing is you know, security cameras, most businesses have them now.
Right.
And having government-sponsored security cameras, I think, raises a lot of issues that, when I hear about it, those are the issues I hear about, the privacy issues, the concerns that, you know, people are watching.
Yeah, City Council's wrestling with that right now. But maybe, Mike, I can stick with you to talk about this larger issue here, because it's clear that the city is working on some new avenues to try to fight crime. They're talking about cameras, they're talking about license plate readers, et cetera. But still, we've had some pretty high visibility cases in the last couple of weeks. 3 shootings over 2 days just this past weekend in the start of June. Then the shooting death of a student on the Garfield High School campus not long before that. I guess I'm trying to figure out what you think of what the mayor is trying to do when it's getting to this whole idea of preventing shootings like these, preventing crimes.
You know, and the police department has been struggling with this, and the mayor's office has been struggling with this for years and decades. It's gotten worse and worse, and it's all about guns and gun violence. And, you know, otherwise, for the most part, crime's kind of down. Yeah. But, you know, the availability of weapons and the inability to stop the transfer of weapons into the hands of young people.
Right.
You know, we're just unfortunately going to keep seeing more of it.
Yeah. Paul, I know that you covered this at the Observer. The state legislature really was trying to put some more gun control bills through to the governor's desk this year. And I think they were successful in some ways, but then we keep hearing about cases like this. Yeah.
They've been, there's actually been kind of a lot of movement on gun control at the state level in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, the current Democratic majority is very pro-gun control, and some of the rural Democrats who were sort of obstacles to that have gone away in recent years. So you see that, but it doesn't really change the fact that most of that stuff is focused on the purchase of new guns and, you know, limiting things like high-capacity magazines and things like that. It doesn't really stop the fact that our society is, in general, kind of awash in firearms.
Yeah. 350 million guns.
Yeah, more than one per person in the U.S. Yeah.
What do you do?
Getting them all, you know, back and out of circulation, you know, would be an enormous endeavor. And, you know, it's just kind of way out in left field in terms of gun control policy, in terms of, like, you know, sort of eliminating that. Yeah,
the situation at Garfield was such a difficult one for the city. But, Paul, if I could, I wanted to transition from school safety and the shootings there to school closures, if I could, because Seattle is in the middle of a process right now to shut down possibly 20 schools, 20 elementary schools, as part of a consolidation process, as we've heard it. Seattle Public Schools have had a series of public meetings about this, and one message I have heard repeatedly is, we need more support from the state legislature. Do you see that happening in next year's session in Olympia? Seattle's, I know, not the only district that's talking about this.
Well, I think there's always pressure to provide more money for schools at the state level. You know, whether, I mean, the problem that Seattle's experiencing is declining enrollment. The way that the state education funding system is set up, the money tends to follow the student. And if the students go away for one reason, if there's a decline in student population,
which is the situation right now,
the money goes away.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this is that this is sort of deja vu all over again for Seattle, because they went through a long round of school closures.
Yep. 2008, I remember.
Yeah, my own kids were in the Seattle Public Schools during that period, and you know, one of them got moved from a school that was closing. And then that whole situation reversed itself almost immediately, and the school population was growing for a long time. And so it's
Seattle's the fastest growing city in the country for
after that.
And it's you know, the politics of that are extremely difficult at the local level. People have, you know, very strong attachments to their schools and their communities around them. So, you know, that's going to be a very fractious argument going forward. You know, whether there'll be any appetite in Olympia to sort of bail out the districts, you know, that I would be kind of surprised to see that.
Fair enough. Paul, maybe I can stick with you. I want to talk about the governor's race, if I could. So we got Bob Ferguson, the state attorney general, Democratic front runner. Who is he going to be facing in November? Dave Reichert, of course, the former King County sheriff and U.S. congressman, has plenty of name recognition. But then the state Republican Party endorsed Semi Bird, who has been more clear in his support for Donald Trump for president. What's going on with this race? Seems pretty messy.
It is pretty messy, and I think it's reflective of the, what I think of as sort of the Trump conundrum for Republicans in Washington State, which is that if you repudiate Donald Trump, then you alienate the base, and even if you sort of hold him at arm's length, as Dave Reichert has been trying to do, the Trump supporters are going to typically gravitate to somebody who's more fulsome in his support in the way that that Semi Bird is. And then at the same thing, the flip side of that is if you embrace Trump in some way or embrace his supporters, then you risk alienating the moderates that Reichert absolutely needs to win this race. I mean, Democrats have a substantial structural advantage here, and Reichert is actually going to have to go and take some voters away from Ferguson in order to win, and that's very difficult with Trump looming at the top of the ticket.
Fair. Ruth, maybe I could jump in with you here. Has Northwest Asian Weekly made any endorsements yet? Maybe it's too early for that.
Too early.
Yeah. Any thoughts about some of these statewide races? Because we've got the governor, we've got public lands, we've got a lot of stuff cooking this fall.
Yeah. Well, the only names I'm really familiar with are Bob Ferguson and Dave Reichert, of course, because he was sheriff.
Right.
Semi Bird's kind of a newcomer and it's really interesting in his support for Trump. So it's, being a Republican, it's difficult when you're running for office, especially with Trump looming over your head. So it's
well, the guardrails are really close together.
How do you mean?
In that the path is fairly narrow to follow. I mean, Dave Reichert back in 2016 made some comments that got him in trouble, saying, I think he would at one point said he would have arrested Trump for the Access Hollywood tape. And,
right.
I don't think that sort of language would be accepted this time around. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. And when we talk about this, Washington has the longest streak in the nation with the Democrat governor, John Spellman, the last one in 1985. And there's a lot of different shoes that fall with this. And Paul, maybe I can just ask you about some of the other races for the AG's office if Bob Ferguson leaves that, as it were, and lands. Any of the other big statewide races that you're keeping tabs on?
I think actually the race for the Commissioner of Public Lands is probably the most interesting just because it's the most wide open. You have King County Councilman Dave Upthegrove, who has the support of the environmental community, which has typically been key in winning that race in the last few. You have former Congressman Jamie Herrera Butler, who was ousted from her district because of her vote to impeach Donald Trump over January 6th. And then you have State Senator Kevin Vandeweghe, who's very much a kind of moderate, timber-friendly Democrat from the Olympic Peninsula, where they care a lot about those races. It's it's pretty it's kind of a really interesting race to follow, and there's a lot of debate in that race about how to manage the state's forest lands and how to manage the state's other resources, because traditionally the role of that office has been to exploit those resources to provide money for the common schools.
Right.
And that has sort of fallen out of favor as as a policy there, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, the wildfires this summer are going to play front and center.
So it's also the state's main wildfire fighting agency, and there's people care about that too. And the firefighters are largely behind Vandeweghe, and
interesting
because he's a firefighter, and so that there's an interesting dynamic there.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Ruth. Maybe I can jump to you because I wanted to talk about another election, the special city council election that's going to take place this fall. Tanya Wu was selected by the council back in January to fill this citywide position 8 role that Teresa Mosqueda vacated. She's now on the King County Council, of course. So there's a primary in August to try to keep the job, and then Councilmember Wu would potentially be up against 3 arguably more progressive candidates, Tariq Yusuf, Alexis Mercedes Rink, and Sonatina Sanchez. And I know that Tanya Wu hasn't been on the job that long, so there's not a lot to go on here. Has she done enough to get the votes she needs? What do you think about this race?
Well, Tanya Wu was a really interesting thing. She, as you know, she lost District 2 by only 403 votes. And for a relatively newcomer in the political scene, that is quite impressive. As far as her tenure in the Seattle City Council, as you said, it's too early to see kind of a track record. But she does have a lot of support. And I don't know too much about the other progressive candidates, but in the last election, it seemed like Seattle was moving away from the more progressive candidates and moving toward more of the moderate. I think Tanya Wu is in that moderate space.
I would agree with you there, Paul.
So I think that there's a real kind of political money angle to this race, because District 2 is a district race, and that's one of the more progressive of the districts. But the race that we're actually talking about is
citywide.
the citywide
Yeah.
race. It's Teresa Mosqueda's seat, because she went to the King County Council.
Right.
And that really allows, it takes a lot of money to run citywide. And what we've seen in recent elections is the kind of, what we can think of as sort of the city's moneyed class throwing in big on independent campaigns in support of its chosen candidates, and Wu's definitely was one of those the last time around.
Right.
And I think you should, we'd expect to see that before. And so
More of that business support coming out.
Yeah, and the
from
question
her,
of whether there would be commensurate support for a progressive opponent.
Yeah.
You saw that with Mosqueda in general, because she has deep ties to organized labor, and so she got support from that realm. So I think it'll be interesting to watch the money flow in that race.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point there. Mike, maybe I can jump to you, because we've got the citywide race for council. We also have a upcoming transportation levy, and I just looked at this in terms of the history you have with the Seattle Times over the past 25 years. We're now at what looks like the largest levy in city history, $1.55 billion currently, as the council's working on this. Would cost the median Seattle homeowner about $500 a year. If voters approve it, that's about $30 higher than what the mayor was asking for initially. So the two camps, and this is probably some common thinking here, they're saying this: raise the price even more, Seattle needs even more transportation investments. Or you got others saying this might be getting a little too expensive. I know that Seattle voters really like to say yes to levies. They certainly have over the past several years. Do you see this measure cruising to a win in November? Or any thoughts on this?
Well, you got me a little bit outside my wheelhouse here as far as coverage goes, but I do think that the public in general in Seattle want more public transportation. And if that's what it's going to take, then I think that's going to be a big consideration. On the other hand, people are taxed a lot in this city, and it's painful for people who, I think my colleague Danny Westneat was just writing about the number of millionaires we have here, and how difficult it is for the rest of us to get along. And so, it's going to be a balancing act, and it could be that people are sick of paying out or can't afford to pay out anymore, and that'll be that.
Yeah, it's going to be there's so many different things on the ballot here. And Paul, I wanted to make sure I got to this. If we could touch on the three statewide initiatives that are cooking here from Let's Go Washington. You've got 2117 to potentially repeal the Climate Commitment Act. 2109, if approved, would end our state's capital gains tax. And then 2124 would let people opt out of the state's long-term care insurance plan. Do all these pass, or where do you see these races going?
So we haven't, the numbers that we've seen show kind of soft support for those initiatives. And in general, ballot initiative, if you're trying to get something passed, you need to start sort of north of 60% approval to survive a concerted no campaign. I haven't seen any numbers that indicate any of those have that kind of support. But the sort of outlier of that to that rule has been historically some of Tim Eyman's anti-tax initiatives. And so you have some, degree of will people vote to lower their taxes. One new wrinkle this year is that the ballot is going to carry a brief description of the fiscal impact, the budgetary impact of the initiatives, which in all three cases is pretty substantial. And, the spending goes to things that people value. And there's some research, mostly from the opposition to the initiatives, that indicates that language might move the needle. But it has to be said, looking ahead to Olympia next year, we could have a really interesting situation because
it's a budget writing year.
It's a budget writing year. If things go to form, there'll be Governor Ferguson, one of the more progressive candidates ever to be elected governor if he wins, and increase probably a larger Democratic majority in the legislature, and their three signature achievements of the last 5 years or so will have been rolled back, along with more than $1 billion in annual spending. So that will be a real tangle. If we get to that.
Such a strange way to govern through initiative. It's just I've always been stunned by
and I think that
how that works.
it is it's a real restraint, and it was clearly intended as a restraint on the actions of the legislature. And I do think that the current or the most recent iterations of the legislature have really been kind of playing chicken with the initiative process. And part of that was that during COVID, it was very difficult to gather signatures, and the initiatives were kind of shut down for a couple of years. And so now they're sort of back with a vengeance.
Yeah, I know. Didn't have any last year. Now we're talking about three big ones.
There might be four. There's that same group.
Oh, the natural gas deal?
Yeah. To repeal, it would basically repeal and prevent a variety of sort of attempts to rein in the use of natural gas for climate purposes. And, there's like $1 million on the street to try and get that thing qualified by this time next month. So we'll see how it goes.
They got some work to do. We only have, I can do the 20-second version, but Ruth, I wanted to ask, is there a headline we haven't talked about you're going to be looking at this summer?
Put me on the spot. No, I can't think of anything right now.
Okay. Well, I know you're dealing with some new ownership and a lot of stuff, so I'll let it go for now.
Okay.
Maybe, Paul, I can ask you some thoughts here about what you're looking at.
Hottest race of the primary, for my money, is the 6th Congressional District, which is the Kitsap and Olympic Peninsulas. That's in the primary, Commissioner of Public Lands Hillary Franz versus State Senator Emily Randall, also Republican Drew McEwen. That's that's a Democratic seat, so the winner, the person who finishes first among the Democrats is likely to carry it in the fall, and it's a hot race. And Senator Randall, who's the younger of the two candidates, has won a lot of very prominent endorsements. So I think that's the one to watch.
All right, we'll see what happens there. Mike, 20-second version, if you could, a story we haven't talked about.
My focus right now is in Kent and the murder trial of Auburn officer Jeff Nelson. Will be for the time being. I think that trial's scheduled to probably go into July.
Wow, there's some interesting reporting you've done there, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. Thank you all for this, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the top local issues of this summer? One person writes, 3 teens were killed by gun violence in the Seattle area this week. My school lost 4 kids this year. The hurt those communities must be feeling is one I know too well. My heart hurts for them and for us. Another group comments, please expand enhanced shelters year-round and enforce unsanctioned camping laws to save lives. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. Great to have that input and great to have your input as well. Thank you very much. I'm Brian Callanan. We'll see you next time on City Inside Out.